Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good evening. I welcome you all, the chair of the session and the worthy panelists who have joined us for this panel of Women Financial Inclusion in collaboration with Netherlands Embassy under 23rd Sustainable Development Conference taking place virtually. And it's a pleasure and honor to have you here. Today we'll be discussing about an important issue, which is very critical to deliberate upon. It's about the deep financial exclusion of women of Pakistan due to multiple reasons. And for that, we have arranged a panel from a holistic point of view, where women from different areas and experts' opinion will be talking about it. So we have representation from the State Bank of Pakistan, where Ma'am Sima will be talking in the role of regulator. We have expert from microfinance, Ms. Roshaneh. We have the chair, Dr. Aliya Hashmi, representing in their advisory capacity of the government. We have Ms. Shumaila from Karandaaz, a key player organization that is facilitating women entrepreneurship. We have Ms. Fauzia Viqar, who is actually a research-driven organization, running a research-driven organization and playing its role in big data collection. And we also have Ms. Corianne with us from the FMO Dutch Development Bank that will be highlighting the aspects of international development network in facilitating financial inclusion, especially in Pakistan. So I would like to request the chair of the session, Dr. Aliya Hashmi, to officially open the session. And also, we are extremely grateful to the Netherlands Embassy for facilitating this session, for actually collaborating with us, collaborating with SDPI on this session. So, ma'am, kindly I request you if you can introduce the speakers and open the session.
Thank you, Dr. Fareeha. It is indeed an honor and a privilege and a very good feeling to be on an all-female panel to discuss the very important nexus between financial inclusion of women in Pakistan in the context of the regional and international backdrop and its role in women's social and economic empowerment. I'm very appreciative of the collaboration of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in holding this panel. And first of all, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Pakistan, His Excellency, Mr. Willem Wouter Plomp, I hope I have it right, who is an experienced and distinguished diplomat and is currently serving as the ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Pakistan. Earlier, His Excellency has served as Deputy Head of Mission in Indonesia and also served at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in The Hague. Our guest of honor today is Ms. Sima Kamil, Deputy Governor, State Bank of Pakistan. Ms. Kamil is the first woman to be appointed as the Deputy Governor of State Bank of Pakistan. She has over 35 years of experience in diverse fields of commercial banking. Before joining the SPP, Ms. Kamil has served as the first woman to be appointed as the president of a leading private sector commercial bank, the United Bank Limited. I welcome you, ma'am, and we are all proud for trailblazers like you.
Thank you.
Then we have Ms. Shumaila Rifaqat, who's the head of innovation and monitoring and evaluation at Karandaaz, Pakistan. She has 15 years of work experience in influencing public policy and designing and implementing large-scale reform programs. Prior to joining Karandaaz, she was associated with DFID Pakistan as governance advisor. And I'm very proud that she's a former student of mine. Next, we have Ms. Ashani Zafar, the Managing Director and founder of Kashf Foundation, Pakistan's first specialized microfinance institution targeting women micro-entrepreneurs. Ms. Zafar has been awarded the Tamgha-e-Imtiaz, one of the highest civilian awards of Pakistan, by the President of Pakistan for her work in the field of development and women's empowerment. She has also won many global and regional awards also. Then we have Ms. Corianne van Veen, Sustainable Finance Officer, FMO Dutch Development Bank, an organization that supports sustainable private sector growth in emerging markets by investing in ambitious projects and entrepreneurs. And I was reading about it. Their focus on gender equality is really the key to which drives their work. Then last but not least, we have the former chairperson of the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women, Ms. Fauzia Viqar, who is also a social activist and thought leader on women's rights and empowerment. Fauzia has succeeded in promoting a culture of gender disaggregated data collection for evidence-informed policy making in Pakistan. So, audience can see that we have a stellar panel, and I look forward to a very, very engaging and inspiring conversation on this very important issue. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Nabil Teoti, the Deputy Ambassador of the Kingdom of Netherlands. And with this, I hand over to Dr. Fareeha to announce the next event.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much. So kind of you. I would like now to invite His Excellency, Mr. Wouter Plomp, Ambassador of the Kingdom of Netherlands to Pakistan, for the keynote message. And Netherlands has been a success story concerning financial inclusion landscape and also the work done in Pakistan. So we are very honored to have the presence of the ambassador and his message.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm very glad to speak at this panel session on financial inclusion for women, of which the Embassy of the Netherlands is a proud partner. I myself feel strongly about financial inclusion for women, but much more importantly, Her Royal Highness Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, in her capacity as Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General, she visited Pakistan a year ago, exactly to promote financial inclusion for women. And she was present, for instance, at the launch of ESAS in November. During the outbreak of COVID-19, this program has been instrumental in helping Pakistan respond to the immediate crisis by providing relief to the poorest households. In Pakistan, there's a big difference between women and men when it comes to access to financial services, like having a bank account or taking out a loan from the bank. And bridging this gender gap can significantly reduce the social inclusion and poverty. And it can positively empower women. And finally, I'm very pleased to be present here at an all-women panel. Because all too often in the past I sat on panels that consisted of only men. And if there's one thing I'm sure about, is that these issues can never be solved unless women are part of the discussion and part of the policy making.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your keynote message. We will now proceed to Ms. Sima Kamil, the Deputy Governor of State Bank. Ms. Sima Kamil has an urgent commitment and she will be leaving the session at 4:30. So I will proceed to guest of honor, Ms. Sima Kamil. Ma'am, I have certain questions, rather discussion points concerning the role of the regulator, the State Bank of Pakistan. So my first question is about women account ownership. So as we know that out of the 4 pillars of financial inclusion, saving, loans, payments, and insurance, actually the financial inclusion starts from saving, and saving actually initiates from account ownership. So concerning the financial inclusion landscape of Pakistan, it's a grim landscape where only 15% of the women have account ownership, as compared, if we compare it with the South Asian average of 65%, that is pretty low. So we are really interested if you can highlight the efforts by State Bank of Pakistan concerning enhancing this women account ownership, so transition to the next pillars of financial inclusion or full financial inclusion takes place. And especially, I would like to ask this in the perspective of National Financial Inclusion Strategy launched in 2015, that how it has contributed to women inclusion, women empowerment, because a good emphasis is on women in National Financial Inclusion Strategy. And what are the outcomes, or if I totally understand it has been extended to 2023, but if there's any midterm evaluation, I would really appreciate if you share. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fareeha, and thank you, Ambassador Plomp, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. And I wish I could have stayed longer because this is something that's very dear to my heart. Moving on to what the State Bank is doing, I'll start where you've left off on the National Financial Inclusion Strategy. Our results on that now are encouraging, but of course we are very, very far from a goal that, one woman account or half the accounts should be those owned and when I say effectively owned by women. However, I am happy to report that at this point, on our National Financial Inclusion Strategy, we had wanted to have 20 million active female accounts at the end of that period by 2023. At this point, while women unique accounts are at 18.5 million, the active accounts are 11 million. So that still remains a very, very low proportion, although there has been progress. So keeping this in mind, we have now been working on two aspects. One is, of course, financial literacy. So we have set ourselves a target that by 2022, we have to train, and we're doing it along with the commercial banks and some microfinance banks, to train 1 million people in financial literacy, and half of those are to be women. And so far we are meeting that target. But having said all that, I have a view that you're right, financial inclusion begins with an account, but has to go much beyond that, right? If you look at different targets, said saving, borrowing, and then actually being active members in the formal space. So what we are now doing is, and we have a launch on Monday for this, and I hope many of you will be invited to that webinar. We are going to launch a framework which we call Banking on Equality, which tries to reduce the gender gap in financial inclusion. And this is actually made up of 5 basic pillars. The first and probably the most, in a sense, not the most important, but as a founding block, we need to make sure that our financial institutions actually have enough women working for them, not just as a whole sector, but also through various levels of management. At the moment, if I can just quote a statistic to you, this ranges from 2% to about 32%. And the average of the whole sector, the amount is about 13%, which is actually extremely low. Even if you look at countries like Turkey, you will find 60% of women are working in the financial institutions. In fact, it's majority women. You may find the same issues as you go up the hierarchy. So that is what we're going to do, is we're actually going to give targets to banks. We don't like to do that. It can be considered a bit too, shall we say, prescriptive, but we are going to actually have to work with the financial institutions to reach certain levels in the matter of 2 to 3 years. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is to ensure that everything is, as they say, gender intentional, that all products and services and marketing aspects that they follow in a financial institution should be seen through a gender lens. Because at the moment, really what happens is men create the products, they create them for men, and they don't actually understand the needs of women when they they make products, services, or even in their sales and marketing efforts. So that's the second pillar that we will be talking about, and we will begin consultation on these pillars from Monday, because we would like feedback from everyone before we actually close this framework. And the third one is going to be two aspects to it, but the principal one is in that every financial institution will have to, at every customer touch point, because now we are actually in a world that is going to go beyond the bricks and mortar branches. There are many, many digital interventions, and there are many interfaces for a customer beyond the branch. So we would like a women's champion within each of these touch points, so that when a woman often approaches a touch point, the issue is very much that she is not taken seriously. So what we will work at is that she is understood, respected, welcomed, and valued. So that's our third pillar. Then we will, the issue always is data. And many of our, especially our larger commercial banks, one, they have a data quality issue. And then they don't have gender disaggregated data. They don't collect it in the way that we would like to see it. So we are then going to have to specify and get a roadmap from them. I think for some banks it's easier, for some MFIs it may be easier, for MFBs it may be easier, but some of them will just have to provide that data to us so that we can start to actually measure what is happening, particularly on the borrowing side, particularly on the savings side. So we will get that data. That will also help us to actually do impact assessment on the measures that we are taking. And the last pillar for this will be a policy forum on gender, where we will meet regularly to get input from various stakeholders, which ranges from persons like yourself. And I also consider that it's very important to get male buy-in, because until you get male buy-in, it becomes a CSR activity or something that you do on International Women's Day. And we've got to work to make this part of, embed it into organizations and embed it into society, that a woman has a right to financial inclusion. So that's what the policy forum will take in people like yourselves, chambers of commerce, SMEs, women entrepreneurs, and then various government agencies like SMIDA and all of those. So that's a little bit in brief what we are doing. We also have schemes for women for borrowing, and then there's credit cover for those already there. Unfortunately, still the take-up has, when we increased the amount from about 1 million to 5 million for women entrepreneurs, the take-up improved. We've got about roughly 550 million rupees lent out there, but still the numbers are too low. So there are about 800 women who've taken advantage of this. A lot of that is the lack of awareness, but a lot of that is also some mindset within our financial institutions. So the real idea now is to push for a sustainable change in the way women are looked at in the financial sector. So that's really a rather long answer. I'm sorry to your question.
That's very insightful comments from your side. Ma'am, another area I would like to tap on, and we strongly believe that it is important to discuss, is the role of commercial banks when we talk about financial inclusion of the masses. So just a bit of a backdrop there, that we have a very strong existing banking industry in Pakistan, and they are the key players in economic growth. When we talk about financial inclusion of the masses, what masses need are no-frill accounts or soft loans with small installments and low interest rate, and also which are non-collateralized. So if we look at the banking sector right now, there's low visibility of commercial banking sector or their alignment with the national agendas. like somehow they're missing from the Sustainable Development Goals concerning National Financial Inclusion Strategy. Also, it's the regulator that has taken a lot of initiatives since 2008 concerning cashless transition of banking or branchless banking. But the problem is that the commercial banks, they need to come in because they have to see the financial inclusion of the masses. I mean, we had just a recent example of the refinance scheme by State Bank launched in the times of COVID. And State Bank actually had the default risk coverage of 40 to 60% for SME financing. So it's actually the regulator calling out to these commercial banks that, we have your back, you just go ahead and facilitate. But still there was reluctancy. State Bank had to intervene. There were problems of documentation. There were demands of collaterals. So how do you see the role of the State Bank or regulator for involving commercial banks? Like, are the commercial banks seeing financial inclusion as a risky, non-credit-worthy investment, or they must see it as an investment and growth opportunity of including masses? So
yes, so there's a certain levels that I can address that. One, all commercial banks are not the same. There are some commercial banks that take particularly women's financial inclusion very seriously, and they're large banks, but the bulk of them do not. So we can't paint them all with the same brush. So there are some that are doing some excellent work, and then there are others who completely ignore this sector. If you're talking particularly about women entrepreneurs and SMEs and lending, there are two aspects to this. One, because of the need for the government to borrow, there is a very easy avenue for them to make money, and banks are commercial institutions which are bottom line focused. So because of that, they go first for government borrowing, which is through treasury bills. Then they go to the AAA borrowers. And then there's just a small amount left for SME or agriculture or housing. The solution to that is twofold, or even at three levels. One, for example, now that we're talking about housing and construction, which is needed to boost the economy, we've actually made mandate targets, because that then was absolutely essential, right? Then we are now giving credit cover, and we're going to be coming up with the Pakistan Credit Guarantee Corporation, which should be operational soon, which will give 60% cover. The third, and I think the most important, is digital. The cost of trying to reach an individual small customer is very high if you do it through bricks and mortar, and if you do it through relationship managers. So I think once and some banks have experimented quite well on this, is if we can use both income estimation tools, which is technical, using people's, because your SME borrower does not actually produce a fancy balance sheet audited by a top-class audit firm. So we are now building with the banks income estimation models, which will use things like utility bills or payments to build a model and a scorecard. So that is actually something that they are leading. So that, plus I think using machine learning and product programs and AI and those things to build algorithms behind that to judge and be able to give loans digitally rather than the kind of one-to-one kind of loan, because that will take forever to build that market. So those are the areas, and we are pushing them through indicative targets, and some ways now we will have to take slightly stronger action. And as we've done in housing and construction, we have actually mandated a target of 5%, in which there will be mortgages as well. So that's the commercial bank angle. But when we can document and our fiscal position is easier, then banks will naturally turn to lending.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Just my last question to you. How do you see the role of civil society and NGOs in propagation of financial inclusion of women, since we have a number of panelists from institutions and also from NGO sector, since they are deeply embedded at the grassroots level and they have higher connectivities with especially the women and the women networks. So what can they offer to this financial inclusion, or to State Bank, the gatekeeper of financial inclusion in Pakistan?
I think perhaps, and we've done it to some degree, but I think our interaction with them and our learning from them would be very important. That's one point. Because they have an understanding, for example, those NGOs that women who are working from home, those are very powerful models. And the State Bank can hope to act as a bridge between the knowledge base and the set of credible borrowers that they have, and between the commercial banks. So I think, and that is why in our Banking on Equality framework, we've got these policy forums, and we've worked with some of them, but we will increase that interaction, because I think there's a lot of learning that they can give to us, and also that when we design our schemes, input from them will be very important. And then also perhaps that way they can also understand the constraints that we have, both regulatory as well as, because obviously we also need a safe and sound banking system. So I think a better understanding between the two would be very important.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. We are extremely grateful for your gracious presence. And
not at all. I'm very happy to be here, and I wish I could stay longer, but I'll have to be excused now. Thank you so much.
Thank you on behalf of SDPI and all the distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, nice conversation, insightful comments by Deputy Governor State Bank, Ms. Sima Kamil. And now I would request the chair of the session, Dr. Aliya Hashmi, for her perspectives. Dr. Aliya Hashmi is a seasoned labor economist. She's the former dean, Department of Economics, Kazim University, and she's also member of Prime Minister Economic Advisory Council. In addition to that, she's also chairman of the Poverty Estimation Committee by Planning Commission of Pakistan. So, ma'am, my discussion with you is in the perspective of advisory capacity that you offer and your extensive experience. So just like I'm sharing a screen with you, it shows a very grim landscape of financial inclusion for Pakistan. If you see, this is actually the very celebrated Global Findex database, which shows the circle of exclusion in countries. And if you see, there are three bigger circle of exclusions: India, China, and Pakistan. Pakistan map is totally covered. It's so big problem that we have more than 150 million, or even much more, that population living in financial exclusion, and that mainly comprise of women. And this is about the financial inclusion agenda setting across the globe, how this is a key item in the agenda globally. What countries have been doing to promote financial inclusion, like Kenya has a success story. And this is the financial inclusion agenda setting in South Asia, how our neighbors are continuing on that. So my question to you, or point to deliberate upon, is that what's wrong in the system, or what's wrong in the equation, that we are falling so behind in this financial inclusion levels, or why such a majority of women are excluded? Is there a problem with the policy design? Is there a problem with how we implement it, or intricate policy design or research-driven methods are needed to be a part of financially included nations? Or on the other hand, on the contrary, there's no rocket science to it. It only needs longevity and continuation of certain developmental policies and sustainability. So as a policy maker, as an advisor to the government, I would really like to have your perspective on this. What do you suggest, or can you highlight what is actually the root cause behind it? Were we sleeping over for a long time and didn't pay attention to it? kindly if you can comment on that.
Okay, thank you, Fareeha. And what I would like to submit is that financial inclusion is just another manifestation of women's inclusion at all levels in Pakistan, beginning from the top at the decision-making level, and then filtering all the way down to the household level. And this is a very, very like a non-technical, but a true explanation of the dynamics of decision making, both at the policy level and at the household level. And I think that unless the change comes in terms of the agency and the autonomy that women have in terms of taking decisions for themselves and for the country and for the development objectives of the economy, things are not really going to change. Yes, I am a member of the PM's Economic Advisory Council. I'm the only female, but again, there are many constraints in really getting my voice heard. And it's I'm very fortunate that I have other forums from which I can raise my voice for the social and economic uplift of women. But it's hard territory, and I would like to also point out the issue about data that the Deputy Governor was talking about. And when I read the National Financial Inclusion Strategy document, I get a strong feeling that it is not embedded in a gender disaggregated data context as much as it should have if we want to expect the achievement of its targets. For example, 25% of all women to be banked by 2020, and now I believe that they have extended it. So we really have to start from the grassroots and understand. So one is an issue of decision making, the other is data, and data is also important in informing us about the profile of women that we are trying to address when we talk of financial inclusion. For example, let me quote a statistic which all of you must be aware of, that Pakistan's female labor force participation rate, according to the most recent labor force survey, which is sort of the repository of labor force data for Pakistan, is 20%, and it has fallen actually by 2 percentage points between the last time the labor force survey was conducted. But that is happening in South Asia. Labor force participation is going down, so that is a worrisome factor now, either because women's work is not properly counted. It's mostly in the agricultural sector, it's in the informal economy, and there are issues of measuring and giving a monetary value to women's contribution to the GDP. Then there is the big issue of the care economy, which has become very, very relevant during the COVID times, that women's economic empowerment successes all over the world are being threatened by the lockdowns and the fallouts of the COVID-19 global economic depression. So we have in our going forward in our policy making, and even as members of academia, research, or even if you're working in think tanks and in the civil society, we have to be very cognizant of the whole context within which we are trying to include women. Why has digital finance so easily picked up and sort of catalyzed women's financial inclusion? It's because sometimes it really requires, most of the times it really requires just a mobile phone. And even though mobile ownership in Pakistan, there is a big gender gap, women still, borrow mobiles and they conduct their transactions, especially, the digital payments have really helped. Also, the cash transfer program earlier, WISP, and now also under the ESAS emergency cash relief, we saw that women really came forward to receive the cash payments because it was all linked to the CNIC. And if they had a CNIC, they didn't need any other sophisticated methodology to fill forms or to go and stand in line in offices. So we have to make things work for women in a way that is conducive, given their constraints, both at the household level as well as the voice constraints they have at the policy level. So I hope that sort of satisfies you in terms of an answer to your queries.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll be getting back to you soon. And very important point raised by Dr. Aliya, that we have to be very cognizant with the whole context in which we are trying to include women. Now I would like to move on to Ms. Shumaila Rifaqat from Karandaaz. Shumaila, as mentioned, is the Head of Innovation and Monitoring and Evaluation at Karandaaz. Shumaila, your organization is doing real good work in the landscape of financial inclusion, especially for women financial inclusion. And one underserved area is women entrepreneurship, where Karandaaz Pakistan is taking the lead. So we would really like to know the current status of women entrepreneurship in Pakistan. What are the kind of stats you are dealing with, and what are the challenges faced? And also, if you can also comment upon what Karandaaz has done, and especially the innovations, and I mean, we know about certain women challenge ventures that were done by Karandaaz. So if you can give our audience and also the panelists a picture of women entrepreneurship, and definitely we'll also come to Ms. Ashani Zafar for that women entrepreneurship part.
Thank you, Dr. Fareeha, for the introduction and for having me in the panel. I'll just share a few statistics that would give a very clear picture of the state of women entrepreneurship in Pakistan. According to World Bank estimates, Pakistan has the lowest rate of women entrepreneurship at 1%. Women ownership of businesses and firms is at 12%, and this is partial ownership. This is not complete ownership of businesses. This ties up with the financial inclusion issue that Dr. Aliya and Ms. Sima Kamil were talking about. We are at women financial inclusion is at 7%. Then if you look at the asset ownership by women, only 4% of the assets are owned by women in Pakistan. If we look at the State Bank of Pakistan gross loan portfolio, only 3% of loans go to small and growing businesses owned by women, whereas 97% go to male-owned businesses. So all of this together, it explains why women entrepreneurship is so low in Pakistan. Having said that, there have been some regulatory developments and policy developments in the past decade that should be acknowledged. It reflects a change from welfare-based approach to women empowerment towards economic and rights-based approach. So we're seeing this policy shift. We're seeing financial inclusion targets specifically for women. They're quite ambitious. We're seeing State Bank refinancing scheme. They've increased the ticket size significantly. They've increased the geographic coverage to national level. So these are important measures, but the real test is in delivery. And that needs attention from the government, and that also needs private sector participation to support this. Entrepreneurship is primarily, private sector coming forward to set up businesses, to support businesses, regulatory frameworks support it, but it's primarily a private sector initiative. So it's got to be a combined effort than just expecting policies to work. Also, policies need to be more longer term. They have 5-year focus, but the kind of results that we're expecting don't come in 5 years. You need to have these programs for 10, 15 years to show results. Also, if we compare ourselves with regional and global comparators, we're at least 2 to 3 decades behind. So we need some very, very serious measures and delivery mechanisms that would support the achievement of these results. Moving on to what Karandaaz is doing in this space. So financial inclusion and economic empowerment is our mission statement. And we drive financial inclusion through different instruments. Women is our target segment. It's a high priority area for us. So we've got 2 programs that take a direct investment approach, and the other program takes a systems-based approach. So Women Ventures is designed specifically to support women-led businesses. We provide business development support to small and growing women-led businesses. We also provide growth capital to these businesses. Currently in our portfolio, we have 18 businesses. We have invested 340 million rupees in them. They belong to manufacturing, services, retail, and IT sector. It's a growing portfolio. Every year, the numbers are going to increase. It started off as a women entrepreneurship challenge, and after 3 years, we've converted this into a regular business line that accepts investment proposals throughout the year. So women entrepreneurs don't have to wait for a specific window in a year to put in their investment proposal. Whenever they're ready, they can do so. So that's one area of direct investment in women entrepreneurs. The other is financial inclusion of women challenge, which again is a challenge round that we've been implementing for the past 2-3 years. And that takes a 2-pronged approach. One is to support technological solutions that would enable and encourage women to uptake formal financial services. And the other is direct investment in financial instruments and channels, such as insurance, savings, credit, that would focus on women entrepreneurs. So these are 2 programs that we use to target women entrepreneurs in Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Shumaila. And very important point raised. Access to finance by women is a huge issue in Pakistan, and we need some very serious measures and delivery mechanisms for women financial inclusion. Now I would like to invite Ms. Sundus, the Economic Policy Officer in the Embassy of Kingdom of Netherlands in Pakistan, as moderator of the session for the panelist for the rest of the panelists in the session. And I would really like to appreciate her efforts in organizing this panel from Netherlands Embassy side, and actually working extensively for this session. So Sundus, we are grateful to you for pulling this off with SDPI on behalf of Netherlands Embassy. And I would invite you, if you can moderate the session.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Fareeha. Okay, so my next question is directed towards Ms. Roshaneh Zafar, Managing Director for Kashf Foundation. Kashf Foundation has tried to create an enabling environment for women micro-entrepreneurs, and they use different spheres of intervention like financial services, insurance and safety nets, capacity building trainings, and social advocacy interventions. My question, Ms. Roshaneh, is how Kashf has tailored the needs of capacities of micro women entrepreneurs?
So we'll have to go back in time to answer that question. There's a long answer and a short answer, and I'll try to answer it within the time limit that we have. So as you know, Kashf was established as a replicator of the Grameen Bank. And if you look at the history of microfinance, it has been a women's-led movement. And it wasn't, it didn't start with that notion, but somehow women were the ones that came at the forefront of it. And there are several reasons for that. And I'd like to beg to differ with what Shumaila had to say. Actually, data tells us something very different about women entrepreneurs. If we talk about the informal sector, which is not what she was referring to, 85% of women are involved in some kind of economic activity within the micro sphere. So we are really talking about a huge number of women who are gainfully employed in some form or the other. Many of them are secondary earners, but over time they've also become primary earners. And COVID has actually sort of brought out the gender inequality. And what I was saying yesterday at another forum was that COVID has the potential for being a gender equality disaster. And we really, it's up to us on how we respond to it in the financial inclusion sector to address the difference. So the scope is very, very wide when it comes to women's economic empowerment. It's the recognition and the ability to design the products, to come up with the evidence, and to look at the delivery mechanisms, and to also be able to reach out to the women entrepreneurs. So I think there are several factors. And then, of course, there's the entire interplay between the fact that there needs to be sustainability in the relationship between the entity and the client. So the models that have worked over the years when it comes to women is the solidarity lending model. That's why I refer to the Grameen Bank, which is an aggregator model. What that means is that a lot of times women within their own households do lack economic agency. And a way to counter that was to set up these groups, what were then called solidarity lending groups, where 5 to 25 women would jointly collaborate. And they would become the voice, or they would become the manifestation of economic agency for that individual entrepreneur in the household, and would then act as what was the term that was coined at that time in the early 80s and mid 70s, was essentially the notion of social collateral, where low-income households and especially women entrepreneurs lack agency, lack voice, are marginalized, but are still gainfully employed within their households. So how do you bridge the gap between the women who are actively involved in the informal sector and the financial markets that don't recognize them? So social collateral was the midway that brought them together. So instead of looking at women as a primary entrepreneur, you looked at her as part of a group. That worked very well, and it worked really well for Kashf till the early 2000s. But then, and we followed the same model in Pakistan, and we demonstrated the business case for investing in women. So the modality that we used, and there were several factors, and I think we've all talked about this, the evidence-backed notion. A lot of times when we started Kashf, we were told it's not going to work in Pakistan because women simply don't work. The lack of recognition for women's economic empowerment, the fact that we do not acknowledge it, the fact that nobody had actually pushed that frontier and said, no, women do work and they do need financial services, and there is a market opportunity to do so. So I think that was the trigger, or that was the window that we opened up, and that was the window that we showed that there is an economic case and it makes smart economic sense to invest in women. And the way we did it was that we not only invested and understood the businesses and the trades and the sectors and the corollary value chain that needed to be created to help women, but we also looked at the mindset change, the point that Sima Kamil was raising in the beginning. When I started in the field of financial inclusion and gender, Dr. Yunus, and as we always say, that it's not women who need to support women only. Men have done more work, as I see it, in the space of financial inclusion for women entrepreneurs across the world. So one of the things that he said to me, Dr. Yunus said to me, was microfinance is not going to be our challenge. Designing products, getting them out, doing the delivery methodology, making it sustainable, raising the finances. And I'm so glad that Corianne is on the call, because we have a partnership with FMO. And they are one of the investors who invest in women's businesses in Pakistan through Kashf. So, it wasn't, that piece wasn't going to be your challenge. Your challenge is going to be mindset change. And that's why over time, when we talked about the financial inclusion part, we also talked about the social change part, because without that, you will not be able to empower women. It's not about transaction. I think it's very wrong. A lot of times we talk about financial inclusion in the context of a transaction, and I have a problem with that. And my problem with that is that it's not about just soldering the burden, taking the money and giving it to the woman and letting the man use it, and not empowering her to make the decision. So transforming change is what we really need to do. And that was the work that we've done over the years, where we invest not just in the business, but we invest in the financial capacity of the woman through, for example, one of the programs we've just run with FMO is called Not Letting COVID Happen to My Business, Post-COVID, what we saw is 85% of our clients were affected by the lockdown, and they lost a substantial amount of their business. 40% of them today are struggling with liquidity concerns and with the inability to bring their business back to speed. So one of the programs that we ran, which was not, I talked about, which was not letting COVID happen to my business, was helping those women who had lost their retail networks to use social media and WhatsApp and other platforms like Facebook to retail their products. So to give you an example, I was just in the field a couple of weeks ago, and one of my clients makes biryani, but she lost her biryani stall and she couldn't physically sell it. So we helped her make a Facebook page, and she was able to start selling her stuff online. So these are this is where you have to enmesh the social side of women's lives with the economic needs, and that's what we did. And it's a long answer to your short question.
Thank you, Ms. Roshaneh. So my next question is, how do you ensure quick and easy access to financial products and services to women, irrespective of their socioeconomic conditions?
Okay, so again, if I go back to the question of designing the product, I go back to the question of understanding the market. And today we have a huge opportunity. One of the things that COVID did, I mean, there's always a silver lining in a pandemic, is what I'm learning, is technology. So we heard this earlier also with a couple of the panelists. They talked about digitalization and how digital solutions can help access to women. So look, I'm sitting in my home and I'm running my office here. And so technology has actually opened up that space. It has a counter, of course. I don't know how many of you saw my daughter popping in and looking over my shoulder, but that also talks about what Dr. Aliya was saying, that home care and the burden of the triple burden of managing businesses, home care has impacted on women much more than it has on men post-COVID. But that being said, I think one of the opportunities that we have today is about digitalization. How can we help, how can we minimize, bring down costs of access to women? Because that's really what the whole space is. Let's look at commercial banks. Why don't they lend to women? And that was a good question that was posed to Ms. Kamil regarding, how banks really think women are creditworthy? It's not that they think that they lack the thinking that they're not creditworthy. It's the cost of accessing women. So how can we reduce that bandwidth? How can we enable financial institutions to reach out to women faster? And what can help is definitely technology and technology. So if you talk about Kashf, for example, we were the first ones to piggyback on a lot of the innovations that were happening in the financial sector. So to give you an example, almost a decade ago, we started using alternative delivery channels, and we did a research. One of the things we always do is when we introduce a convenience to the client, we want to see how does it impact them. And what was happening is that when women could use the agents to repay, they could repay anytime, 24/7, basically. So they were repaying over the weekends. Whenever they had money, they would just go to the local agent and repay. While in our branches, they would have to wait to collect the money. And what would happen is that at times the husband would take the money, or some other requirement would come in, some other family need would emerge. So what this was really helping them, the convenience of being able to repay at the agent, meant that they had more control over the repayment process, and they knew where the money was going. What was happening in the past was they would give the money to the husbands or the sons, and sometimes the sons and the husband would use it and not repay. So the women would be stuck in the middle. So a lot of times technology or access helps women's decision making and pans that out. So what we've been doing is we've been watching how this works. We are currently running just to, so that we had the agent network set up as part of branches banking about a decade ago. We piggybacked on that immediately. Now there is, of course, the zero, the basic account, as it's called, BBA, as it's called by State Bank, which is basically open biometrically, and you can be an agent for a bank to open it. We're also running a pilot for that to help us engage with the client. So what would happen is we disperse the money in her account. She decides when she wants to take it. She can repay through that account. So we are actually running pilots in both an urban branch and a rural branch. And I'll tell you a very interesting statistic that we just discovered. Our notion was that, opening the accounts, again, the back end is very simple. The technology is not difficult, but the human-centered element of this, of use of technology, becomes difficult when we are talking about women. So we were a little hesitant initially because we thought, maybe women are, what we had seen from a lot of the data was that women are at the lower end of the telephony, which means they basically have the basic phone. They don't have smartphones. But interestingly enough, in the Lahore market, our data is very different and it's encouraging. 40% of our clients have smartphones. So that's an interesting thing. What that's telling us
I can see. Yeah, so there is sorry, Dr. Fareeha, we are sort of running short of time, but what I understand it from you is that there's a difference in data from urban region and rural region. So there's a lot of difference in that. And I'm sorry, but we're running a bit short of time. So I have to move on to our next speaker, if that's okay.
Sure. But just let me end this on this because this is an important point. So one of the things we are seeing is that the technological revolution is becoming gender agnostic. So we can actually leverage upon those networks also and use digital revolution as a way of getting women banked. So that's the last point that I wanted to make. So there's a huge opportunity, and it's for financial institutions to to leverage on that.
Thank you, Ms. Roshaneh. Thank you so much. All right, my next question is to Ms. Corianne van Veen, Sustainable Finance Officer. Corianne, I would like to know, based on your international experience, can you comment upon the demand side of the challenges faced by digital financial services? Can you comment on that?
Yes, of course. And first of all, thank you very much for the invitation for FMO to be on this panel. I'm very honored to be part of this group of amazing women. And I just want to stretch that they have a lot more experience in the field of Pakistan than I do. So I will bring just a little bit of the international investor perspective. And I think in terms of the demand, that has been great. We have seen in the international investment space, there is such a great demand now for gender lens investing. And one of the things that we are also part of and that we see has gained a lot of traction is, for example, the 2X Challenge, which is an initiative from development financial institutions to mobilize funding for women's empowerment. They launched this in 2018 and actually overshot their targets even before the end of the deadline. So it's very interesting how this has gained so much traction. And for us specifically, that means that we're actually doing two things. We are, first of all, looking to financially support companies and institutions that already do this very well. So I'm very happy that Mr. Ashani Zafar already mentioned our collaboration, for example, with the Kashf Foundation. So that I think is an example of our support and our collaboration with an organization that really has this in their DNA. Another aspect that we also do is for organizations that do not have this, to pitch to them the business case of tapping into the market potential that women do. And yeah, like the other panelists already mentioned, sometimes this is not so visible, right? Because it's very much in the informal sector, but they are there, women are there, and they are working and they have their business. And this is something that we really like to show and pitch. And we do that then usually through providing financial support. So also, for example, through risk sharing facilities and providing our support in reducing the costs, for example, to really reach these women. But I also want to stretch that it's important to have the non-financial services intertwined, so that it's really a financial and a non-financial service that brings together, because that really is the way to reach it. For example, also with digital tools that I also really want to stretch.
My next question is, how can we ensure that the processes of financial inclusion and economic development, no one is left behind?
Yeah, it is a big challenge, I would say. So for FMO also, reducing inequalities is one of our core strategies. And it basically means that we want to reach that sustainable development goal in the next decade. And as we have heard also in this panel, there is still a long way to go. I think, and especially in terms of the pandemic, for example, it has a huge potential to actually create adverse effects. We know that in crises like these, people who are already underserved are usually the ones who get hit even worse, which is the case for women in this pandemic as well. So I think what we should do is what's in the new terms nowadays is called building back better, so that we, there is a saying, never waste a good crisis. And I think that is really what we have to do here. How do we make sure that when we come out of this and in our journey towards this, how do we ensure that everybody can be included? And for example, really designing financial, non-financial digital services to include everybody, that is a key. And just to give an example, we know that when we talk about digital services to women, for example, we know that mobile phone use of women is less than of men, but we do know they do have access sometimes. So very, very practically, what does that mean for a financial institution that designs a digital tool? It can be as simple as being able to have multiple accounts on the same device, because that really then allows women to use also the application on another device. And it can be these practical things that a crisis like this teaches to think about.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Corianne. All right. Now, finally, I would like to direct my question to Ms. Fauzia Viqar. Fauzia, you've had first-hand experience in collecting data about the inequalities faced by women. I would like to know, in your opinion, how does gender disparity affect financial inclusion of women?
Thank you very much, Sundus. Thank you to SDPI for the conference and this important panel, and of course the Embassy of Netherlands for this very important and almost all female panel, which I'm very happy to be part of. Before I answer your question directly, I just want to unfortunately cast a little bit of a gloom on the optimism that is associated with the technological revolution and it being, as Roshaneh put it, gender agnostic. While I completely agree that technology is gender agnostic and it's going to reap benefit, unfortunately, unless and until we address the social determinants of exclusion, the gender aspect of exclusion, technology is really not going to help us, because it bears from research that, you know, despite the fact that cell phone subscriptions have risen, broadband usage has risen somewhat, it hasn't really led to an increase in employment, at least not in informal employment of women. As a matter of fact, as Dr. Aliya put it earlier, the stats for unemployment have gone down for women, for employment have gone down for women, both in Pakistan as well as in India. So we, unfortunately, despite this high positive correlation between, despite the fact that there has been a high IT component of it, unemployment is going to increase. Secondly, another case in point is that, we know that there has been a lot of increase in the use of technology in countries like Bangladesh also, and they've done well on employment per se. But because women are concentrated in the entry-level repetitive jobs, they haven't really been able to reap the benefits of technology because of the social aspect of it all, because of which, when reports have shown recently that, like in Bangladesh, by 2030, it is predicted that about 60% of the garment workers will lose their jobs because of the invasion of automation. So therefore, extremely important to understand the social determinants of the financial exclusion of women, which takes us to the fact that what is it that we need to understand and address if we want to improve the plight of women, or if we want to address the exclusion of financial and others of women. I want to remind everyone that we are doing quite poorly, as a matter of fact, on multiple indicators for women, which start from demographics and they go on to their education, their health, and then come on to their economic participation and opportunities, etc. also. So if you look at the fact that, even in terms of our population, I frankly still worry about the fact that our demographics show that we have a disparity, unlike many countries in the world, where we have more women, we have more men in Pakistan Then we have women. So I'm wondering where the missing women, why the missing women for that matter, you know. Then as earlier Dr. Aliya also talked about, and others also talked about, the fact that simple factors like, you know, acknowledging the identity, the presence or the birth of women is an important determinant, which means that the birth registrations are going to tell you that women are valued as well as men are, or females are valued as well as males are, the male child. You see that there is a significant disparity in the registrations in terms of women, females and males, which then translates into CNICs. We have such a lot of disparity still, despite the fact that I think the organizations like NADRA and the ECPA, etc., are doing a good job in terms of CNICs and voter registration, but still we have a significant and continuing disparity. You know, so it seems like a losing battle. And what therefore we need to address, or rather we need to catch, is that end of the exclusion, that recognition of the identity of the woman, understand that gender has its own issues, has its own aspects of exclusion, which culminate in financial exclusion, but much work needs to be done on other things. For instance, you know, you have your literacy rates, fairly poor for girls or women. 52% women are literate, 72% male are literate, you know. Out of school children in this day and age, 40% males are out of school and 49% females are out of school, you know. Then you look at other factors, you know, you have many more women who are getting higher education, but they're not transitioning into the labor market. You have only a 5.5% transition from the higher secondary education to the labor market, and an extremely large youth need rate, which is not in education, employment, and or training. In Punjab, we conducted a survey recently, and we found that about 47% of the females in Punjab who are of an employable age are neither in education, nor in employment, nor in training. So what are we doing wrong? What do we need to address so that we can talk, or we can catch the end of the problem, which is the financial exclusion part of it, you know. And I unfortunately feel that just by increasing financial literacy, by the financial inclusion strategy, it helps a lot. I certainly do not want to discount those factors, but I feel like we'll need to do much more at a much lower level if we are serious about addressing this issue. Which means, what do we need to invest in? We need to invest in the girl's education. We need to invest in her health, the child's health. You know, we still have an alarming rate of maternal mortality ratio. Why in this day and age? Why can we not address it? Why is it that our employment is going down? Our employment actually is not really going down. It's like not being counted in that. So what do we need to do? And I have to share with you that having worked not only in the government, but even currently I'm advising the governments of Punjab and KP in a technical assistance program, I feel like there is a lack of thinking on it. You know, it does not bring together the elements of exclusion to be able to get the results that we are trying to achieve. For example, when we talk about decision making and increasing women by 2030 and 2050s of the world and all, we don't really understand that today on this table that I'm talking about these things, I have not seated another woman. You know, Dr. Aliya talked about the fact that she's the only woman at the many tables. I have been the only woman at many tables. It's a very lonely world out there. And in that also, you cannot carry the burden of your entire gender. You know, you can't be the representative of the entire female, because then people say, here she goes again, you know. So start by representation. Bring in more women, I agree, right at, and then knit the forums together so that the education forum is talking to the health forum and the health forum is talking to the economic participation forum, which I can tell you with certainty does not happen, despite the fact that we talk about achieving SDGs on education, health, poverty, etc. But we feel like we will only bring in women when we are talking about SDG 5, not necessarily when we are talking about the SDGs 8 and the SDGs 11, and most importantly, SDG 16, you know. So try to get a holistic picture of the whole thing. In that, I cannot emphasize enough the role of the state. I absolutely appreciate the role of Kashf Foundation, Karandaaz, Gates Foundation, whatever they're doing in Pakistan, others, whatever they're trying to do. I do not want to discount that. But it is not their job to look at the welfare of 208 million people. It is the job of the state. And unless and until the state takes leadership on this, at the provincial level and at the national level, it is not going to happen. The state is not taking leadership on it. Case in point being that independent institutions which look after these special interests, unfortunately, despite being, almost half of the population, women are still the special groups and the special interests. What's happening? The institutions which have been created to look after their interests, which have some say at least, or some place at the government tables, are the women's commissions. Women's commissions are without chairs. The National Commission is without a chairperson since 2019 October. Punjab Commission on the Status of Women is without a chair since May of 2019. Unfortunately, the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan is also without a chair since March of 2019. So unless and until we have these autonomous, independent institutions, oversight bodies, we are not going to be able to push the agenda of exclusion or push the agenda of inclusion and push out exclusion very well. And for that, I feel like we need to empower institutions and start at the social aspect of it rather than, well, I shouldn't say it should be not an either or. So I would say that along with addressing financial exclusion, look at the social determinants of that financial exclusion, address them, and like the rest of the world, we will make progress.
Thank you, Dr. Fauzia. Thank you so much. And I agree with you. We indeed need to change the way we think, and we need to do much more at a lower level. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to, again, give the floor to Dr. Fareeha. Thank you, Dr. Fareeha.
Thank you very much, Sundus, and very comprehensive discussion by all the participants. Before I request the chair of the session, Dr. Aliya Hashmi, to conclude the session by summing it up, I will just like to get back to each one of you. For futuristic evidence-based approach, may I request each one of you to give one key takeaway that you would like to give from your area of expertise for policy making or for implementation framework, since we are trying to collate all the views from different areas of expertise concerning financial inclusion. Like Ma'am Roshaneh said that solidarity lending model works. So is it time to make use of social collateral? Is it time for self-help group model to work in Pakistan? So just like that, may I request all the panelists, if Ms. Ashani Zafar, can you go first on that? Kindly.
Yes,
like
definitely.
one quick takeaway that you would like to be a part of policy making or implementation framework.
Yeah, I think it's very important to design the point that Simi, Kamil also talked about, designing products that are gender centric. And we can't always assume that the same product that works for men is going to work for them. And to do the research to actually corroborate the design of the product. So I think a lot more evidence-based decision-making needs to be there in terms of product design and financial services we offer.
Sure. Ms. Corianne, would you like to state yours?
Yeah, I would say building on this, it's designing products with women in mind, integrating financial approach, but also non-financial, including financial literacy.
Okay, wonderful. And Shumaila Rifaqat, Ms. Shumaila, please, from women entrepreneurship angle.
See, Dr. Fareeha, I agree with the approach that women-centric models are needed, but on experience, I also feel equally important is awareness raising around these models and using a language that people can easily understand. So there's a lot of gatekeeping around these technical discussions and models, and when the government is communicating, people and the target audience do not understand what is being done for them and how they can avail that. A prime example is the refinancing scheme of the State Bank. It's an excellent scheme. Talk to the SMEs, they don't know about it. They don't understand what it is. So if it's for them, they should be able to understand them as well. Thank you.
So Dr. Aliya, your perspective as policymaker.
I think the main message that I heard from all the stellar speakers, I would say, is that we have to engage better with the realities of the women and keep the social aspects and their socio-economic contexts while designing even financial instruments. So I'll throw a little bit more light in the concluding remarks, but this is basically what I'm hearing. And the second message that I'm hearing from the panelists is that digital solutions and technology has to be harnessed again in a women-friendly and women-accessible manner for it to have to translate into better financial inclusion or overall social inclusion as results for women. Thank you.
Sure, ma'am. Ms. Fauzia Viqar, very quickly over to you. You highlighted that social determined aspect of financial inclusion is critical. Would that be your key takeaway, or would you like to?
Yes. And in that, I just want to highlight the importance of access to and control over resources and property rights. This is at really the core of why women are not equal participants in economic activity in Pakistan.
Thank you very much. And may I please request the chair of the session to kindly conclude the session. Since we have a time constraint, the last 10 minutes are left for question answers. So ma'am, kindly if you can conclude in the next 5 minutes.
Okay. Yes, I was thinking that should I also respond or ask the panelists to respond to some of the questions that have come up in the chat? Because I think there are some very, key questions that have been asked. One is how can students and young researchers engage with the institutions that we have on the table? So in order for this panel to be inclusive of the audience also, I would rather give up my summing up and give the panelists, a chance to respond to this, because there is no other way in which these young students and, young researchers can really directly interact with the people around the table. Anyone who would like to take on this question, Roshaneh, Fauzia, you have, you are heading organizations and students want to know how they can engage with these organizations. Do you have any internship programs or collaborative research opportunities for students?
Thank you, Dr. Ali. I'll just answer it very simply. Please visit our webpage, and we have a whole internship program there. You can directly apply to us. So that should be
okay. Thank you. I hope the students are listening and the researchers, young researchers, are listening to this offer of availing internship opportunities at Kashf Foundation. And I know that Kashf is very, very magnanimous in collaborating with researchers. One student of mine also wrote an MPhil thesis on the business case of the whole, sustainability of the Kashf initiative at the MPhil level. He wrote it. So I'm sure they would benefit. Thank you, Roshaneh. Fauzia, do you want to say anything?
Quickly, Dr. Aliya, yes, I'd be happy to take in interns if there's a fit. But more importantly, students need to get involved with practical realities, and their research should be very relevant to some of these issues that we are talking about. It's possible. I have dealt with universities sometimes, many times, as a matter of fact. Research is very far removed from what is needed for policy prescriptions also. So better research.
Exactly. Thank you. And now, Fareeha, how much time do we need, do we have before we close? Do we have a couple of minutes? Fareeha?
Yes, ma'am, there are 12 minutes to go, so we have time for a couple of more questions. Yes.
Okay, then another question that I see in the chat is, is environment at work, a factor in keeping women away from work, from their work being recognized formally as work? And also, I think I'll couple it with the institutions, for example, the tax authorities, the banks, and other regulatory institutions that they have to interface with in terms of their entrepreneurship roles. So, Fauzia, you have done a lot of work on how to make institutions more friendly for women. So can you please give an answer to this?
It's a very big question, Dr. Aliya. Yes. So I'll quickly say one of them is, of course, we've talked about it, is representation at all levels. Because we really do not have critical masses of women to make institutions friendly for women. So bringing in 1 woman, 2 women is not enough. We need to have a critical mass of women. Secondly, bringing in women in decision-making positions is extremely important, that we need. Along with that, implementation of policies like harassment prevention policies, etc. That effective implementation of that, as well as an simple matter of enabling environment. Because Dr. Aliya, you must have seen that in the government, even today, the environment does not even sometimes, many times, provide for washrooms for women. Like we are still unfortunately talking about these basic amenities for women to feel comfortable in an environment. Yeah, those are my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank you very much, Corianne. I just looked at the chat and I've noticed that you've promised to share some resources about how gender diversity at the workplace and in the workforce can increase employee satisfaction and reduce turnover. So thank you very much for that. And I'll just use the time that we have left to again thank all of the panelists for really putting their heart out on this matter of financial inclusion. And I think it was a very, very informative panel that we also heard about an initiative that State Bank of Pakistan is about to embark on, which is called Banking on Equality Initiative, which really implies that there is a stark realization at the State Bank that without this gender equality initiative, they are probably not going to be successful in moving towards achievements of the targets they have set for financial inclusion for women and to reduce the gender gap in inclusion. So I look forward to how those 5 pillars of the gender, of the Banking on Equality initiative are, spanned out. And I also look forward to the invitation of the Deputy Governor, which should be forthcoming for all of us, at least on this panel, about being included on the Gender Policy Forum to discuss how these 5 pillars should be rolled out. And I think it is a positive announcement on the part of the Central Bank of Pakistan, the State Bank, and it ties in with Fauzia's emphasis on the role of the state, that unless and until there is a realization at the highest tiers at the state that, just assigning targets and, goals for women-specific outcomes in the economy and even in the social sector is not going to work unless you really contextualize the policy and the model in the constraints and the contexts that women live in Pakistan. And Roshaneh, thank you very much for presenting the case of the Kashf models, so well. And I take the point that you are talking of an overall transformational change in the lives of the women, which Kashf has aspired for and also has been able to achieve successfully. I wish that, we would have case studies which are taught to students in universities, and now even colleges are offering 4-year BS programs. And being an academic, I always see what can be taken back to academia from panels. So I think this should be really done, that whatever the successful examples and cases we have talked about, they should be mainstreamed into the syllabi also. So, and that is the only way students are going to get mainstreamed into this work. Corianne, you pointed out a very important point about pitching the business case for women entrepreneurship in a way that, it is convincing for raising capital and for making access for women to financial markets. We are not even talking of the high-end capital markets over here, which remain a dream for women-led enterprises. So maybe one day we will also break that barrier and talk about those. And also, of course, the SDGs, there is a lot of talk about how to reframe the whole discussion about sustainable development and about approaching the SDG goals in the post-COVID era. And I think our discussion has also thrown a lot of light that, SDG goal number 5 or SDG goal number 8 is not going to be achieved unless we put all the variables together in a modeling approach. And Fauzia, thank you for highlighting the very important nexus between the social aspects and the social determinants with the role of technology in empowering women, and with the role of finance in empowering women. So I think if I had to take one big message from this panel, is that we cannot dissociate the social realities of women, while designing policies, which also financial inclusion policies, as well as policies of promoting digital technologies. But the positive message is that there are proven successes in breaking those barriers, just as Roshaneh very elaborately explained. And I'm sure, and also the work that Karandaaz is doing, Shumaila explained that, successively trying to break the barriers and bringing the women into the fold of economic and financial inclusion. So I would, at the end, I would like to again thank the Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands for their valuable support and collaboration in holding this panel, and for myself and for all the women on the panel. I think we feel that we have been greatly facilitated by coming together, even though it was virtually, but still in discussing and sort of reflecting on how we can make financial inclusion work for women. So thank you very much. And over to you, Dr. Fareeha.
Dr. Aliya, thank you very much. Very rightfully said. And on behalf of SDPI, I would like to thank the chair of the session and the worthy panelists, and especially the Embassy of Netherlands, the Ambassador of Netherlands, and the Deputy Ambassador of Netherlands Embassy for joining us, and for Ms. Sundus, Munawar, for all the efforts in organizing this panel. We'll definitely be sharing a policy brief on derived from this session, and we'll be sharing with all the participants of this panel very soon, within 2 months or in less than a month's time, I guess. And definitely, and I would request if we can engage you in future as well for policy dialogue or a transformative approach that we just talked about concerning women financial inclusion, because a lot of work is still needed in this grim landscape of financial inclusion in Pakistan. Thank you very much.